We are delighted to be with Isabel Wilkerson, whose wonderful book, The Warmth of Other Suns, is the epic story of America's Great Migration. America is a migrant country. We've always been this. And for a long time, when you talked about the Great Migration, you were talking about whites coming out of Europe, you were talking about Puritans,
Chinese coming across the Pacific.
To reframe this as, well, it doesn't say the Great Migration, it doesn't say a Great Migration, and it is one of many migrations. How is it different from the others?
Well, first I'd like to say that one of my goals in writing this was to show how much we have in common, really, as Americans. America, as you said, is a country that was built and is great because it is the coming together of people from all over the world to make this a new world, a new country. And we all have an immigrant past in a way. We all have someone.
Even the natives, they happen to, as the first people, as we call them in Canada.
10 to 13,000 years ago.
They were just the first.
That's right.
First of many.
They had to cross the Bering Strait to get here. So someone in all of our histories had to, at some point, have this yearning for something better, act upon that yearning, and often not just for themselves, but really for their children, because by the time they left, they had already become the product of whatever hardship there was back home. And so many of the people who came from other countries never learned English really truly well, and never really were able to fully participate in American life as they might have liked to. So the real beneficiaries were the children. And so I wanted to be able to capture how that same immigrant heart was also inside the minds and hearts of African Americans who were essentially ensconced, limited, cordoned off in one region of the country, the South. They were in a caste system that bound them by law to only certain things that they could do, certain places that they could go, certain people that they could be around.
And that's what was called Jim Crow.
And they had that immigrant yearning, you might say. They were not immigrants. They were citizens of America, of the United States, and yet in order to be free, they had to go to some other region of the country. And that decision to leave, to me, is a courageous and heroic one, because it takes such a great leap of faith to make that journey.
And it's no mean feat.
There would be no guarantees. They had to have the lowest of expectations, really, if you think about it. They were not going to the North to own great mansions and run companies. They were going merely to be able to do such simple things as to be able to apply for any job that they felt they were, able to do.
Although there were jobs they could not apply for.
They didn't realize that till they got there, but they were hopeful that they'd be able to do that their children would be able to go to schools that they would not have been able to go to in the South at that time. The schools were woefully and openly discriminatory, really, against African Americans. Aggressively. There are statistics that show that black teachers were being paid openly a third of what their white counterparts are making. The school boards were quite comfortable in stating that this is what we're going to do, and they made no options for it.
If they needed to balance their budget.
They would cut short the black school year. The school year would be cut short. There were no explanations or apologies made for it at all.
shame.
No shame at all. No, that was just the way that it was.
You make a striking point that still seems incredibly relevant about the difference between being a migrant and being an immigrant. Mm. And the fact that most of the people that were those internal immigrants, adamantly rejected the notion of being an immigrant because they were here first.
Exactly. No, they absolutely did. I mean, I used the conceit of immigration as a way for us now, years later, to be able to put in context what was driving them to leave. So what's driving them to leave is what drove anyone to leave a place that the only place they'd ever known, for a place they'd never seen, for a future that was uncertain but that they hoped would be better for themselves. That was the goal. So in some ways, that is the immigrant heart. But they rejected that term. They themselves do not view themselves as immigrants. They were resentful at the idea that I might mention that as a term, because they said, no, we're American citizens. But in order to recognize that, to become truly American citizens, they had to leave someplace.
Curiously, you used the word migrant for white individuals who went north and then went home.
That's a fascinating thing that you pick up on, because actually we're limited by the literature and by the way people in the Great Migration were defined. They were defined as migrants. Perhaps, hopefully, you might say, that maybe they would go back. But they were never migrants. They were always people who left, generally, with the idea that they were not returning. They made this decision that they were going to live their lives out in a different place that might be more open to them. And so actually there were large numbers of whites leaving the South at the same time. But they were more likely, much more likely to return home, much more likely. The African Americans who left during the Great Migration, the vast majority of them never came back.
Why?
They didn't come back because they had left and they decided that this is where they wanted to live. I mean, they made a leap of faith in the way that immigrants do.
In addition to which, their lives were in danger. Everything was in danger if they went back to the context from which they'd come.
Well, another thing is that they had so much at stake, because this whole process is so much more complicated than we think. The goal of the book was to have people put themselves in the mindset of someone who was doing this. I wanted you to be on the train with them, going out. I wanted you to be in the field with them or working some small job as they were dreaming of leaving. I wanted you to be with them when they arrived. And so these people went through all of this range of experiences that you wouldn't expect, that we might not think of now, because it wasn't simply taking a new job because your company has relocated you. And so they had a huge stake in staying no matter what, because if they went back home, people would say, well, we told you so. We told you you couldn't make it. We told you it was cold up there, you wouldn't find a job, we knew you weren't going to make it, and here you are back, hat in hand.
And that was from their own people.
From their own people. From their own people, who would say, see, we told you so. You'll be back.
The other side of that is that, and you make a wonderful argument, that they were immigrants functionally in terms of the communities into which they moved, that they shared a great deal with the Jewish diaspora, with the Europeans that had come over in various ways. You can set up a set of variables and they track all the way across, with one exception. The other immigrants ultimately could pass.
Yes.
As Americans.
Well, that suggests that the African Americans weren't Americans. They could pass. They could become a part of the community, and their origins would be invisible. That was not an option, and it goes to what we have come to think of now as urban blight, urban ghettos, and all the things that go with that. And your representation of that, to me, recalibrates my sense, at least, and I hope other people's senses of what actually is going on in our cities and has been going on for, say, the last 100 years.
What you refer to is an essential factor and chapter in the book, which I am so indebted to the work of Stanley Lieberson and some others who is at Harvard, who had done some of the initial work in this area. My goal was to find the people who would through whose lives we'd be able to relive and recreate the experiences of this departure. But it's true that once they got to the North, while they could speak English, and that was a true, huge advantage that they had, they also had the disadvantage of being highly visible upon showing up for getting in line for a job, or signing up, going to apply for a mortgage, or attempting to get a house. They stood out instantly, and that worked against them, as it had in the South. And they had not really anticipated that they would have as hard a time as they did.
Well, this is about racism in America. It's real straightforward. I sort of balked when you said pass, because one of the great American stories is the one that Annette Gordon Reed tells about Thomas Jefferson's family,
yes,
and Sally Hemings's children, some of whom did pass.
Yes.
Now, that's a word that not everybody knows anymore. But before, well, I don't know that I don't know when that word sort of went away, but to pass was, in fact, a very specific thing, that you were ethnically and culturally and biologically...
You could pass for white.
Right.
Yes.
You could pass out of the black experience into the white experience, and nobody'd know because your color... if you weren't subject to the one drop rule,
Yes.
because your color was such. I mean, this is just colorism. This is white supremacy and passing into another class as well as caste. A very
Absolutely.
different distinction you make very carefully.
Completely different. I like the idea of looking at this as a caste system, because for one thing, it helps us to see the structure of what was created to maintain a false and unsustainable system ultimately. That was driven by the idea that these people are recognizable. So the lower caste was recognizable by the way they looked. And so it was easier to maintain this caste system because the people couldn't move back and forth or make a pretense that they were part of one caste that they were not.
First it was slavery, then it was Jim Crow.
Absolutely. And so the idea of the people passing, which is what you've referenced, you can see the reason why. It's tragic and obviously, quite controversial, but you can see why they had a high motivation to try to pass, to avoid all of the disadvantages of being black during the Jim Crow era. They could just walk into another world and be like the majority. And at a great loss to them, though, because that meant that they had to turn their back on everything that they knew in their own original family, which is just a tragedy on top of a tragedy, if you think of it.
This is Isabel Wilkerson, and when we come back, Bill Russell will continue the conversation that has been prompted by The Warmth of Other Suns, a wonderful book that she has written, and that title is one about which we will talk as well when we return with The Paula Gordon Show. Be right back.